Hi everyone, welcome today. Our channel is The Journey Within with Christopher Mack. This is based upon our book by the same title, The Journey Within. We are in the greater Los Angeles area and, we are in some challenging times today and felt like it was a great topic today to talk about our inner wounds and traumas as, we go through these difficult times.
And the times are difficult. And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our channel. And as she said, I am Christopher Mack, and it's Wanda Webster. The times are challenging, but there is the section in the book that talks about wounds, and I always like to give an example of wounds. We're all too familiar with physical wounds, like if I get cut, I could always use some alcohol or some peroxide. If it's a cut that warrants a bandage, I can bandage it up, or I could hit my head and the wound would be a hickey. But normally those wounds, they usually go away. If I get a scrape on my elbow or get a scrape, a scab will come, it'll eventually it'll heal, and then all of a sudden sometimes there's a scar left and sometimes there's nothing left. It's just the skin goes back, and that's nature's way of taking care of the body. Wounds, we usually heal from those wounds, and
And people know how to take care of those kind of wounds, generally speaking.
and sometimes when we get those wounds, once they've healed, we forget about them, or if they leave a scar, we'll remember what we did during the time to get the wound. And so with our external wounds, even though sometimes it could have been traumatic, we have more of a healthier response about our external wounds. Meaning that they don't hold us hostage, and they don't take liberties with our body. Once they're healed, we basically forget about them, or we just remember the incident or the condition in which they occurred. But not so with the internal wounds, the wounds that come. Maybe even a 2-year-old may get wounded when his mother abruptly yells at him, "No, don't do that, stop." And of course, he always, sometimes the 2-year-old will launch a protest, "No." And so now you have a 2-year-old and an adult in a shootout, the 2-year-old wanting to do what he wants to do, and the adult knowing maybe the danger or something that could happen to the 2-year-old as a result of his behavior. Keep him safe. We say no. And 2-year-old boldly protests, "I'm going to do what I want to do when I want to do it." But we're talking about internal wounds. And some of those wounds, once the wound internally starts to become a part of our history, it seems sometimes those wounds, they leave this residual effect where they keep sending out messages. And that's why when I said sometimes when you have wounds, you have an uninvited guest that sometimes comes to you, and rather than you having a response, you have a reaction, and the information is coming from that wound that occurred in whatever the situation is. I can remember one of my wounds as a 4-year-old. But before I tell you about that, I'd like to say last week there was the idea of talking about wounds, and the video just didn't have the quality that we're trying to present to our audience. And Wanda says she didn't like it. And all of a sudden, the space became uncomfortable. But rather than to let a wound give me the information, I was able to look at what was occurring for me mentally and emotionally. Well, one of the things that caused a lot of wounds in my life was criticism, which means I didn't like to be criticized. And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden I realized I felt this idea that I was being criticized for not having the quality in the product or not discussing, the wounds. And I sat there for a moment, but then because I do this internal work, I had the epiphany that maybe I should just leave the room, went outside, and I started to realize that, even though that wasn't really necessarily criticism, it felt like that, but I was able to negotiate and navigate the feelings that would have put me in a real discussion with Wanda about, well, what are you doing? You're making me, rather than acting up, I was able to come back and says, okay, let's just do it again. And I had realized that I didn't let the wound hijack me, or I didn't let the idea of my perception about criticism distort the reality that we had. And the day became, I was able to live a really beautiful, peaceful day because it didn't get, I didn't get hijacked, and I didn't throw my condition out on Wanda, but I was able to look at it and able to respond 100% consciously rather than unconscious. Because see, when the wounds start to send out these messages into our mental body, and we start behaving according to the wound, and not even realizing that that's history. That's something that happened or occurred a long time ago. And so I was able to say, wow, I could say this wound that I had in my perception about having criticism or being criticized didn't hijack that day. They gave me a legitimate, intelligent response that that was very beautiful, peaceful. I enjoyed it. I shared it with Wanda. I said, wow, I felt this way when you said what you said to me, and I felt like you were criticizing me. But then I said, you weren't necessarily criticizing me. You just wanted a quality product. I didn't have to insert myself in that in any way. And I did not have to react to that. I was able to 100% respond.
Right. We did not get into a shootout.
Didn't get into a shootout. But going back to one of my most crucial wounds, and I was 4 years old, and it wasn't until I was 5 years sober, and I went to the donut shop, and I was sitting there, and then all of a sudden there was this scene playing in my head of my dad being removed from the house and me being a 4-year-old crying profusely, not being able to breathe, but just crying because he was being removed from the house by the police. And the reason I'm telling you this is because when he was removed from the house, I didn't realize that that was a wound. But then when I got older, when I was 18 years old, I was on Crenshaw and I got into an altercation with the police. But then that wasn't the only altercation I had gotten into. Uh, there was a guy who was going to fight me, and the police came up and they hit me with a baton, and I started fighting the police. And the thought in my mind was, they're not going to make me do anything or whatever they wanted to do. This is my life. They're not going to make me do something I don't want to do. Plus, I didn't feel like I was doing anything to warrant to be arrested or to be, to be beat up by a baton. But then I always found myself in these altercations with the police, which could have ended up real badly for me. But, I was chokehold, pistol whip, all kind of things happened to me by the hands of the police. But it was because of the wound that caused me to react every time that I would see the police. And 9 times out of 10, I hadn't done anything to warrant, such behavior, but I was always bristling with contempt and ready to protect myself and defend myself. Well, that day, 5 years, when I was 5 years into my recovery, I found that scene, and it had an emotional tie to how I perceived the police as taking away something from me that was something that I loved so dearly, which was my dad, and taking him and removing him from the
And
house.
he hadn't done anything. He had not broken the law.
Yeah, he hadn't broken the law. They just
Your mother.
came in and they removed him from the home, and he never got back. But that was between him and my mom, whatever that issue was,
Mhm.
and he never came back. And so I didn't realize the severity of the wound. And it played out for the 20-something years where my perception of law enforcement and policemen was really according to what was being given to me by that wound. That was the information, and I would react to it. And when that happened to me, I said, wow, I was able to reconcile some of the ill behavior that I had found myself in, and to get free from that was the I guess it was it to be free from it, from any reaction to the policeman or police at this time, to have that freedom to say, wait a minute, I don't have to go from that wound anymore. That wound can no longer impress upon me some behavior that would probably jeopardize my safety, my freedom, and even my life. So to understand how wounds work in in me, if you take a look and find your wounds, you might see some of the things that you've done that cause you to react the way you do.
I'm sure a lot of the um Black people today have a lot of reactions to the police, a lot of negative reactions to the police based upon some trauma that they've had too.
Well, it's almost like historically, I was told the other day by a friend that historically the police were actually slave catchers who went out to enforce the law and bring back runaway slaves. So the whole thing is kind of like it's distorted and twisted as far as the reality. Uh, you have one idea that says we're here to protect and serve, and of course, when you don't look like the predominant establishment or the system, then who are they protecting and serving? And usually, sometimes, as as a Black person, as a Black man, you know, I don't fit the bill of what the system says is acceptable and appropriate. And um, that further creates wounds as a group of people. So I think that there's this social wound that we carry just because because we can look at the news and we can look at all of the incidents, and there are people that look like me, and so to be killed because you also want a better way of living. So uh, I get the anger, but I don't get the action. The anger is legitimate, but the action seems to be putting us in more of harm's way, and it's becoming dangerous to us as a community who've already suffered a lot, you know. So I would just say let cooler heads prevail. It's okay to be angry, but, you know, to respond in a constructive way. But to find that you can get angry and not destructive is one of the great benefits of being able to do introspection and reflections upon your own life, you know, to know what is being said to you at any given moment of the day, because you're very much aware of yourself. So,
Because these wounds fragment your personality. Whatever trauma, I don't know anyone who didn't really grow up without any trauma. It's my double negative there, but everyone had trauma growing up. We don't, it's just the nature of life here on planet Earth. So, but it does fragment the personality, and in order to become whole, there's a healing process that has to happen.
yeah, yeah, and I think the healing is when you get a chance to say, oh, wow, I don't have to react to every little thing, and I don't have to have, you know, this erroneous perception, because sometimes my perception is in error. And if I can see the error, I can correct it. But if I can't see it, then it can always run havoc on you. So I think that as a society, we have wounds. As an individual, we have wounds, you know, and it's up to us to mind and mend our wounds.
Well, otherwise, we might like to anesthetize ourselves with drinking, with drugs, with food, with shopping, to distract ourselves from that inner pain that we're feeling.
Right. It's okay to have pain. It's okay.
Okay. Any last words you want to say today, Christopher?
Loving you is easy because it's beautiful. I think that was a Minnie Riperton song. I think, was it loving you is easy because you're beautiful. I just like that. So
You want to give a shout out to Filippo and Dorothy?
yeah,
These beautiful necklaces. I don't know if you can you see mine?
yeah, it's beautiful. I can see it.
This is
And,
lapis.
right. And that's from the Fibonacci code. The beads are organized in such a way. Dorothy, who does energetic alchemy, which actually helps a person to really take a look at themselves. And I would recommend Dorothy or Filippo. And
Filippo
Filippo,
even has recalibration workshops as well. But these
right.
are at phibeads.com, PHI beads.com, if you are looking for some beautiful necklaces.
But they're also functional, because the Fibonacci code is the whole code that is related to life. And so, you know, that's the 1 plus 1 is 2, and 2 and 1 is 3, and 3 and 2 is 5, and it goes on and on. And that sequence is found throughout creation. But if you go to phibeads.com, you'll learn more about it. It's functional jewelry, and it helps you to get in touch with yourself. So everything that helps you to take a good look at you is always a plus. I don't have the fix for anybody's life. I'm never thinking about fixing, but I do like sharing things that produce well-being and peace.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.